Marisol, are you going to be driving the deck, or are you going to turn it over to Ryan? There you go.
It's yours to take now.
Okay, thank you. So as Ryan's getting a set up here, just a quick matter of background and introduction for both Ryan and myself. I'll take 30 seconds here. My name is MK Palmore. As Marisol indicated, I'm a field chief security officer for the Americas for Palo Alto Networks. I am also, prior to joining Palo Alto Networks, a retired special agent and executive from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I spent 22 years with the FBI here in the US. The latter part of my career, I had the opportunity to lead cybersecurity investigative teams covering down on national security matters, criminal intrusion matters, and digital forensics. So some of my lens and optics about what portends for the future is certainly influenced by that, but also by the vast experience that I've accumulated since being on board with Palo Alto Networks. So again, it's a pleasure to talk to you guys.
And hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Olson. As Marisol mentioned, I lead Unit 42, which is the global threat intelligence team for Palo Alto Networks. I've been working in private threat intelligence since 2006, where I started with an organization that's dedicated to creating threat intelligence reporting for government and private entities. I joined Palo Alto Networks 7 years ago, specifically to form Unit 42 to look at all the data the company has available to us to better understand adversaries, how they're attacking our customers, what their motivations are, what their techniques are, and to then use that insight to both help improve products by integration with the product teams, as well as to share that information with people who can use it. We do that with governments and private sector entities through sharing relationships that we've built up so that we can have a greater impact on the overall security landscape through sharing of threat intelligence. With that, I'll go ahead and jump to the next slide. And hand to you, MK.
So again, Ryan and I collaborated some weeks ago, now months ago, on putting together what we thought would be issues that would be top of mind for security practitioners for 2021. Some of this is not a mystery, right? I mean, some of these issues that you see outlined here, some of the topics that we're going to cover are themes that seem to continue to impact large-scale enterprises year in and year out. And so they are recurring. And the problem is, from a practitioner standpoint, is that we haven't quite figured out the cipher on preventing these attacks from impacting the large-scale enterprise. So while some of it may be, again, repetitive and recurring throughout one year to the next, we do find that there are some themes that might enable the security practitioner to be thinking about what the future should look like for their organization, and maybe give you a little bit of a heads up as to how you should be approaching security moving forward, with some high-level themes, again, around topics around emerging technologies and capabilities that the modern day enterprise needs to be employing now in order to better posture itself for the future. So without further ado, we'll dive in here to the deck and begin talking about our 10 predictions for 2021.
All right. So the first prediction is all about automation. And this is a pretty bright prediction as well. We really think that in 2021, automation is going to make a huge difference for SOCs. One of the challenges that we have been aware of for years is there aren't enough humans to really keep up with the number of attacks that organizations experience. We simply can't handle all of these by people taking all of the action that's necessary to detect and respond to the events that are coming in. So automation is clearly one way that a SOC can do this, where they can take some level of the overall volume that they see at the top of their filter, the alerts that are coming in, and automatically handle those so that they can triage them to determine if they're true positive events or not, to enrich them by getting more intelligence related to the threat to understand if a SOC analyst needs to make different choices. And all of that is with the intention of getting better results, but also moving much more quickly. Speed is really the key with between detection and response for a threat. The longer that an adversary is inside your network, the more impactful that's going to be to your network, or the more impact it may have. And one of the pitfalls that we commonly see SOCs running into when they're thinking about how they might implement automation is that people tend to think of it as an all or nothing sort of experience. Either we go and we build a fully automated SOC and we get rid of all of our analysts and everything has to be completely done with the machines. And then they get hung up around how will we automate this decision or that decision? Can we really hand our network over to the machine to make choices? And the key is you don't need to do that. You need to start small. Start small with tasks that are very repetitive that your analysts do on a regular basis, and start implementing automation to relieve the burden from them. As they implement more and more tasks, you won't necessarily scale to a fully automated SOC, but what you will find is that you've taken a lot of the burden off those analysts and you don't need to hire as many people, build as large of staff to be able to handle the same volume of attacks that you were experiencing previously. The robots are not here to replace us and replace the people. They're really here just to make us more effective and make it easier for us to do our jobs.
So ransomware. I think that throughout the relatively young history of cybersecurity and the cybersecurity practitioner, it's rare that we've seen an attack vector and a modality as effective and as impactful as ransomware. Our prediction, quite frankly, and I think this has already yielded dividends in terms of what we've seen in terms of recent news, is that ransomware will continue to impact large and medium-sized enterprises and certainly consumers throughout 2021. Ransomware has been around for several decades, but it wasn't until the recent 5 years or so that adversaries figured out how to monetize this whole process to their benefit. And unless and until we begin to take steps as practitioners to prevent and interdict the activity, certainly identify it if you have the capability to do that as it's being executed, we'll continue to see ransomware have a large scale impact on in terms of victimization of enterprises. How is it that we combat this particular threat? Well, right off the top, we know that of the 1,000+ variants of ransomware that are out there, the vast majority of them largely rely on known and existing vulnerabilities. As a component of that, vulnerability management is continually identified as one of the consistent gaps that enterprises experience in terms of how it is that they create a resilient and effective security posture. So vulnerability management should be beefed up on your prioritization list. You should be thinking more about leaning into your vulnerability management process and trying to ensure that you have, at the very least, the capability to shut down known and existing gaps within your security environment. Secondly, increase visibility. Visibility gives you lots of different capabilities. The first of which is if you can see it, you can prepare for it. If you can see it, you can respond to it. If you can see it happening, you can certainly interdict it. And so the capability of expanding the visibility within your security environment becomes paramount. Now, I've certainly realized that that is becoming increasingly difficult for the security practitioner. In a couple of slides here, we're going to start talking about the prevalence of cloud, the expansion of the attack surface from the vantage point of the security practitioner. And we know that this is a difficult task, but you've got to begin reducing that attack surface and allowing yourself, at the very least, the capability to prevent these attacks in the future. Thirdly, I would comment that the proliferation of ransomware, again, the ability of these adversaries to gain this tactical advantage and then monetize their success could be shut down as well through the use of user behavior analytics and giving yourself, again, a leg up on understanding what the baselines look like within your environment, and then enacting and surfacing tools that might enable you to prevent these activities as they are occurring. One thing's for sure, the adversary, they are experts at return on investment. They will not stop using this particular modality, this particular attack vector, until we as practitioners learn to shut it down and relieve them of the ability to make money from this process. But until we do that, ransomware will continue to hit big, and it will continue to be a financial generator for adversaries throughout the globe.
One final note on ransomware to follow on what MK just said. Last week, we released our latest ransomware report talking about the types of attacks that we've seen in 2020. And a key takeaway for us was that the average ransom paid by organizations who were impacted tripled from 2019 to 2020. And that's not, this is for enterprises generally, that's not $500 to $1,500, that's $100,000 US to $300,000 US. Massive ransoms being demanded because these attackers have realized how they can really put the hurt on organizations. All right, jumping into the next topic here. Cloud security. It was really key in 2020. A lot of organizations made a transition to the cloud due to the pandemic in 2020. They didn't want to have as many people inside of data centers. They realized that they could take advantage of plans that they already had to move into the cloud and accelerate those based off of the changes in their overall working environment. But a key thing to keep in mind when it comes to cloud security is the top way that organizations are breached through the cloud is because they've misconfigured something. It's not necessarily where they have a vulnerability or where somebody clicked a link and they got malware on their network like you see in traditional offices. It's really around the way that they configured their cloud environment didn't take advantage of a lot of the security capabilities or necessarily just locking that system down or those services down so they're only accessible to the people who need to get to them. One of the stats we put in our last cloud threat report was that 46% of AWS workloads that we identified didn't have any kind of multi-factor authentication on them, which means if somebody were able to steal a password, all they would need to get access to the data in those workloads is just that password. They wouldn't need to jump through any other hoops. It's not like they have to go through a firewall at the edge of a data center and pass through a bunch of hoops. It's really just have the password, get access to those systems. And that really just comes down to misconfiguration. Another example that we identified last year was Docker instances, which had been not secured at all, that were being used to build into effectively worms spreading around the internet and mining cryptocurrency. Docker instances that were open to the internet, someone could log into, issue a command to it to load a Docker image and start executing it, which would then go and do the same thing to other Docker instances. Once again, misconfiguration. This is something that's relatively straightforward to lock down, but people aren't making those choices. And one of the things that we know when people moved more quickly to the cloud in 2020 is they probably didn't put as much time into securing those cloud transitions as they would have if they could have done so more slowly. So in 2021, what we think a lot of people are going to be doing is playing catch up. They need to go and secure those cloud instances, secure those services before attackers discover them and they start taking advantage of them, which is certainly going to happen if they are not locked down and properly configured.
As we talk through these ideas and themes for 2021, it strikes me that maybe this one, mapping the entire IT infrastructure, should have been our #1 prediction and prioritization for you. The #1 critical security control is understanding and being able to identify your assets in any particular environment. What we've been finding year in and year out is that organizations, especially as they continue to expand, as they continue to grow and get to be infinitely more complex, are losing sight of assets that could be internet facing and that could have access points and vulnerabilities, which make it easy for the adversary to gain access to your environments. So we are re-advocating, again, this #1 on the critical security controls list, mapping the entire IT infrastructure, begin to take note, take steps to ensure that you understand exactly what the attack surface looks like for your organization so that you can better strategize and then tactically move about reducing that attack surface and making sure that you understand what vulnerabilities you have and what access points you might need to defend as it relates to attackers. There are several things impacting this expansion and complexity of the IT infrastructure. Issues like SASE, or the Secure Access Service Edge. This idea now that we need to converge a couple of different IT and cybersecurity capabilities, things like SD-WAN, things like CASB, issues like remote access or secure remote access. We need to start cobbling them together in solutions that allow for practitioners to, one, better identify where their information is, but also be in a position to scale out their cybersecurity resources, scale out policy, and be able to touch, identify, and gain visibility into your information wherever it might exist, and certainly to protect it as your stakeholders, both internal and external, gain access to this information. Again, mapping your entire organization will become extremely important. likely needs to be pushed up on the prioritization list. I can tell you that by observation, we as an organization have gone out and provided this kind of information to our customers and potential customers. And we have use cases where we've been able to identify upwards of 20% of assets that weren't accounted for that belong to these organizations that were forward facing. And so as it relates to prioritization, you can't shut down vulnerabilities if you don't know that they exist. And so mapping the entire organization should be priority number one for you.
All right, next up is the way that working really changed as far as where we were located in 2020 and what that's going to mean for 2021. In 2020, the enterprise network effectively became the home network. A large percentage of workers began working from home. A lot of enterprises had some technology in place to be able to provide secure remote access for their users, but a lot of them needed to scramble to grow that to be able to support a much larger user base, or to rethink the potential threat vector of having everybody working from home, because it certainly is different than when you just have occasional people working from home. In 2021, as the pandemic hopefully comes to an end and we see changes in the way people work, more people return to the office, more people return to regular travel, more people return to working from alternative locations. This is going to, again, introduce additional change for network administrators and security administrators as far as identifying what is normal. Suddenly, you're going to see a big shift in the usage of your secure remote access. That's going to return to people traveling, people who are in different countries, and all of your policies may end up need to apply differently, depending on what you actually configured for in 2020. So it's going to become even more important for people to have these globally scalable, consistently applied security policies for users wherever they might be around the world, whether they're in the office or at home or in a coffee shop, because we're going to see this shift back to an extremely dynamic environment as far as where users are actually working from.
So during my time in the FBI, we spent a tremendous amount of time in the national security space, looking at the tactics and techniques of the advanced persistent threat or nation state adversaries, and trying to really understand how it is that they go about engaging, identifying targets, and then successfully victimizing targets. You see here at the bottom of the screen a couple of notable instances: the Anthem breach, the OPM breach here in the US, the DNC breach of 2016, and certainly the prosecution or indictments of the Yahoo breach in 2017 for a breach that had occurred many years before. And then, of course, last year, tail end of last year, we all see what has occurred with the SolarWinds breach, the effects and impact of which we will not know for quite some time, to be honest with you. What does this all lead to? What does this all connote to us as industry practitioners? It's that the advanced persistent threat, or nation states, will continue to use asymmetric approaches, not only to gain access to your environment, but ultimately to exfiltrate information and do damage to your organizations. Prevention. How is it that you posture yourself to adequately prevent an advanced persistent threat, one from gaining a foothold and then subsequently exfiltrating information out of your environment? You're going to have to lean on emerging security tools in the area of user behavior analytics. This is one area where understanding from a baseline standpoint what normal looks like in your environment becomes increasingly important. I don't know of many enterprises that are at that stage, but you should strive to understand what normal looks like so that you can more readily identify what anomalous behavior looks like. I use the term asymmetric, and I hope that you understand that that's an important aspect of the advanced persistent threat to understand. They have time on their side. They've got deep pockets. They've got the technical expertise. They sit and they wait and they look for the best opportunity. Here's the other advantage they have available to them. Because they don't necessarily have a financial output that's needed to be generated, they have time on their side. And so they take their time moving slowly throughout enterprises. And this becomes even more important why you need to have an ability to understand what normal looks like in your behavior. I mean, we have instances every year when these breaches come to our notification that the time to detection, the time to prevent, still extends beyond 200 days in many cases. And we all know that within a 200-day time period, if you've had time to roam around in an enterprise and then begin exfiltrating information, you can escape with nearly everything that you've identified. The advanced persistent threat is real. The challenge for most organizations are, how do you know if you're being targeted? You should assume that there are certain aspects of your environment that may be of interest, even if it's just probing and reconnaissance that they're doing to spin themselves up for another breach that they intend to engage upon. But the advanced persistent threat is real. It will continue to be asymmetric. And again, you need to be thinking about user behavior analytics, the ability to have visibility into endpoints, and an ability to identify, again, anomalous behavior in your environment so that you can interdict their activity at that critical point in the cyber kill chain. It'll continue to be impactful.
Securing the Internet of Things is going to be one of the big trends of 2021. And if you're not aware, there are already billions of IoT devices that are connected to the internet, literally billions. They're all over our homes, they're all over our offices. And what some people don't necessarily consider is that these are really just tiny computers. They're tiny computers that serve a specific function. And being tiny computers that are connected to your network and running software, they also exhibit lots of vulnerabilities. They can be taken advantage of. They can access your data. They can become a relay point for an attacker inside the network as well. And for all of these reasons, I think 2021 is the year that organizations truly need to start adopting an IoT device lifecycle management process. And what I mean by that is, initially, when you are trying to identify and get your hands around this problem, you need to identify all the devices inside your network. That's step one. You need to at least know what are all these IoT devices, because many organizations, they're not purchased by the IT group. They're not purchased by people who are used to managing computers. They may be thermostats, they may be security devices, they may be phones. They might be entirely outside that realm, but you need to know what they are initially so that you have a good inventory of those systems. The second thing is onboarding them into your management lifecycle so that you understand what type of software is running, where can they get patches if that's even possible, and really build up a plan around how you can secure them. And what you'll find is many of these devices can't accept the traditional security tools that you would normally want to use, like on an endpoint. You can't necessarily install an antivirus product. You may not be able to install patches and actually keep the system working, which means you need to actually use the network itself to secure these devices. You need to find a way to isolate them, put them into their own sort of network groups, ensure that they can only talk to the systems that they need to talk to. If you have a thermostat, it probably doesn't need wide open access to the internet, but it may need access to an update server or the logging server for where it reports back in to say what the temperature is. You need to profile the network and understand that. Second, you can optimize these systems as well as you go through that life cycle. Ensure that they're actually performing as well as they need to and provide a value back to the groups who are actually getting the benefit from them. And then finally, be prepared to retire them. IoT devices are strange in that people think about physical devices wearing out over time, that the gears inside them won't work anymore, or the hardware, the electronics in them will fizzle out and they won't be able to perform their function. But when it's a tiny computer, the software inside of it also could lead to the need to retire that device. If a device has gotten old, it doesn't get updates anymore. It's running Windows XP, as a lot of devices are that are deployed in networks. It is potentially a bigger security concern than the actual value that it's providing if you haven't found a way to isolate it and ensure that it's operating securely. So building your own IoT lifecycle management process, having technology in place that can accomplish all of those steps, from identifying the devices and managing them through to the end, where you can actually retire them and replace them with something more effective, is a critical thing that I think a lot of people are going to tackle in 2021 before it becomes too late and they experience a major attack from one of these little implants in their network that they hadn't considered was a potential vector for a threat.
A financially motivated adversary has quite a bit going for them. They operate with near 100% anonymity. They have available to them the same technology that you have available to you. And quite frankly, they're pretty good at what it is that they do. Each year, we seem to see that attacks continue to rise, And actually, the successful attacks continue to rise. And I think it's a wonder on our part as consumers, as potential victims, why we would ever believe that they would stop doing what they're doing because they are being extremely successful. Here's the challenge. The financially motivated adversary is driven by this activity, targeting consumers, targeting large-scale networks, large-scale enterprises, counting on the presence of vulnerabilities, either in the large-scale enterprise and certainly the unwittingness of the consumer in an effort to be successful, proliferating their attacks and monetizing nearly every aspect of the cyber kill chain. This is extremely damaging. So damaging that from a capture perspective, there is no one entity that can adequately capture the impact to global business in terms of cybersecurity adversaries, especially those that are financially motivated, and its impact on global enterprises. Here's the challenge. They will continue doing what they're doing. They are experts at return on investment. And as long as they continue to win, as long as practitioners continue to make mistakes, they will continue doing what they're doing. So how do we combat this? There are a couple of different things that you need available to you. One, from the practitioner's vantage point, we need to be thinking about security holistically and globally, right? The modern day enterprise is typically a global and expansive network of information located in a variety of places, sometimes in data centers, sometimes in the cloud, certainly on endpoints for the users. You need to be thinking about a way to have visibility into all of those structures and then take into account some of the points that we've mentioned earlier, like automation, like understanding and mapping out the entirety of your network and enterprise. You got to have tools in place that allow you the ability to help manage all of this, certainly. But I'll go back to that point about reducing the attack surface, reducing the ability of the adversary to become successful. Some additional ways that you might go about doing that. The typical ways, of course, training employees, training others to be on the lookout for things like social engineering, phishing, which continue to be better part of 50% of access points for successful attacks, but also your consumption of threat intelligence. If there is one area that I think is more vital to security practitioners than all the tools available to you, it might be the area of threat intelligence consumption. No one entity has complete insight into the threat landscape. But if you can stitch together an understanding of the landscape with some high value sources of intelligence, you can better posture yourself and your organization to combat these ongoing attacks. One thing's for sure, they're not going to stop. Again, the difficult thing, I think, for those of us who don't engage in this kind of activity is to understand that for these folks, this is their job. They're quite successful at it. Ryan mentioned a couple of figures earlier in terms of the uptick in profitability with things like ransomware. Understand that the adversary, the financially motivated one, makes quite a decent living from this, better than most folks, and they will continue to proliferate these attacks as long as we give them ample opportunity to do so.
To follow on what MK was talking about related to financially motivated attacks, the adversaries who are launching these attacks will launch them against large enterprises who have significant SOCs. They have huge security teams who can defend them, but they're just as applicable to small and medium businesses. The same techniques that are going to be employed oftentimes by the top level adversary will also be used against an organization who simply has a one-person security team. And that's a level of asymmetry when MK was talking about with APTs versus enterprises that's really similar. You've got a really dedicated attacker who's got access to extremely good tools. And for a small and medium business, they may not be in a position to operate 50 different tools that they might be thinking they need to really defend against that type of attacker. They might not even have the staff to operate 10 of those. What they really need is consolidation of those tools into a smaller tool set that's more manageable by a smaller team, as well as automation, as I referred to earlier. When it comes to SMBs in particular, the recent Microsoft Exchange 0 days are really, really relevant. You've probably seen stats around how many Exchange servers were compromised in those attacks, but the numbers are easily in the tens of thousands. And a lot of the organizations who were impacted by those attacks are small and medium businesses who've deployed Microsoft Exchange. They're running their own server, but they don't necessarily have the type of staff that's required and the type of investment that's required to, keep them patched instantaneously, which was what was necessary with those Exchange attacks. From the very moment, even before Microsoft released a patch for them, the whole internet was being scanned and those systems were being compromised with a web shell that took over those servers. It's really key for these organizations to understand that while they have limited resources, they are facing the exact same adversaries, and they need to find a way to simplify what they're deploying and automate it so that they can raise their protection up to the level that's commensurate with the threat that they actually face.
Each year, as we take account of the major industries impacted by significant security events, it seems as though the public sector, globally, public sector, finds itself in the top three, usually wrangling around up there of financial services, healthcare, and the public sector. Here's the challenge. Public sector in all places, globally, typically suffers from the problem of legacy technology solutions in their environment, what I call an inability to be agile as it relates to adopting new security tools and solutions, and quite frankly, an adherence to old approaches. This is one of those areas where we need to see some dramatic change as it relates to how it is that they acquire tools, how it is that they think strategically about long-term security solutions, and how they go about consuming these tools in order to better posture themselves. Public sector is interesting in that oftentimes they have deep pockets, but sometimes the difficulties in the way of contracting, obstacles get in their way, and the rotation of personnel sometimes impacts the ability to think long-term and strategically about protecting their environments. Some of the most critical information available, some of the most critical resources in the way of infrastructure are behind the defenses of public sector entities. These entities need to be thinking long-term and strategically about the security apparatus, building into account resiliency and adopting some of those new technologies and skills and things that we talked about earlier in our predictions. The public sector is vital in most cases, and nearly every country is vital to the welfare of its citizens. And in most areas, again, we're advocating that the public sector begin to think differently about their security. We saw even last year here in the US in 2020, the public sector get bombarded following some social unrest events. And again, largely because they were unprepared for the proliferation of attacks that were initiated via hacktivists, or folks I like to call the disruptive group. But again, it's about thinking about security apparatus of the future, planning for the future, and creating a resilient environment that's ready to combat the technological challenges as we all move forward.
So there's a few themes that you may have noticed as we were going through these 10 predictions that MK and I have made for 2021. A lot of them are based off of changes that happened in 2020 and the way that we responded to those changes. And that means we have to think about how do we ensure that we did things securely and that we're prepared for things returning to normal. Others are related to the fact that we have this asymmetry between attackers who have really advanced capabilities and organizations who don't necessarily have the right capabilities to be able to defend against them properly. In other cases, we've got new technology that is here no matter what people want to do about it. In the cloud with IoT, you may try to hide your head in the sand and say, this is not a problem for me, but it's already here. There's no delaying this any further. You need to be prepared for the IoT devices inside your network, inside your potentially the networks of your users' homes, and everything that you're doing in the cloud, and ensuring that you're making the right choices around how to secure those environments. And I'll just note, as the year has slowly moved on, we've had some major security events already. SolarWinds was at the very end of 2020. These Exchange vulnerabilities were a worldwide event, and we don't think we're at the end of it yet. This is going to keep happening throughout the year, and it's really key for people to stay on top of it, think about these 10 things and how they can use these insights in securing their network. With that, I'll hand off to MK for a good summary.
So what's the call to action here? call to action. What is it that we're asking of security practitioners, of strategists for cybersecurity, of large-scale organizations and medium-sized and small businesses? We're asking you guys to be visionary. Think differently about cybersecurity, differently than you have in the past. There's an old saying that continues to proliferate about doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Clearly, because of the success that we've seen in terms of how the adversary has been successful, clearly we need to be thinking differently about how we secure the large scale and medium-sized enterprise. We need to take a different approach. Ideas like defense in depth, which were appropriate for their time, need to be tweaked a little bit. We need to start thinking differently about how it is that we secure the large scale enterprise in all of its various locations. And we think here at Palo Alto Networks that a platform approach is the direction that the industry needs to be going in. Automation. We started with this, we'll end with it. This is where we have to understand that we can't scale from a human resource standpoint to the problem. Automation is here. The attackers have it. They certainly use it to their advantage when they can in order to target your enterprises. You need to be thinking about how you can automate many of the things in your security apparatus, again, so that you can take that small, highly focused and tailored workforce that you have combating these problems and really allow them the opportunity to engage and level up their capabilities. And then lastly, the concept of zero trust has arrived. It has been a buzzword in the industry for many, many years. Its time has come, and we need to start thinking about removing trust from the security environment. Trust in and of itself is a human concept. It's an idea that we've taken as humans and applied it to the security environment. It's an inaccurate application. Trust should not be a component. It exists as our main vulnerability and the reasons why these attackers are so successful. Hopefully, you guys digest, take in these 10 predictions that we've provided to you, and also take this summary and call to action and think about how you can better posture your enterprise, how you can engage in those conversations about what the security apparatus of the future needs to look like, and begin taking steps now, not tomorrow, right now, to better yourself for the attacks that will be coming in the future. We appreciate the opportunity to present these predictions to you, and I think there's some time possibly for a Q&A here. Thanks. Marisol, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, MK. This was an incredibly good presentation. Hopefully it was as useful for the attendees as it was for us listening as panelists. Some of the attendees have been asking their questions via the Q&A section, which our team has been responding in either in local language or in English. So right now we don't have any open questions. So if you have any questions, if you're listening to this webinar, you can ask them either in Spanish, Portuguese, English. We'll translate the questions if need be. And now is the time to take an opportunity and ask directly to our panelists. So if there are any questions, right now is the time. So let's give it a couple of minutes. If no questions come in, then we'll close this webinar. So let's wait and see.
Marisol, while you're waiting on that, I have a comment. Oftentimes the challenge for security practitioners is trying to figure out a place to start, like where to begin this sort of new search, the ability to sort of reshape the security apparatus that you're responsible for protecting. One of the things that Palo Alto Networks has in play now is a team from one of our acquisitions called Expanse, which starts that conversation for you in terms of helping you identify where your assets are, what might be forward facing or internet facing out there that you've lost sight of. And again, as I indicated in the talk, we have use cases where we've been able to show a 20% uptick in the way of assets that are internet facing for a large scale organization. I think a starting point can be difficult for organizations. The Expanse offering from Palo Alto Networks is a fantastic place to start, begin those conversations, and begin creating a roadmap of the future in terms of what your security apparatus needs to look like.
Thank you. That was a great addition, MK. By the way, to everybody that is asking, this webinar will also be available on demand. I will be uploading it to our Latin YouTube channel. so you'll be able to have more visibility into it. Oh, we have a question from Michael Arias. So thank you, Michael, for asking it. So I'll translate. So, okay, so what's the role that frameworks like COBIT 2019 will have in the organizations in this 2021?
So I'll take a first stab at that. Ryan can join in. I'm a big fan of frameworks. I think frameworks are an important assistance in terms of creating roadmaps for the modern day security apparatus. Frameworks like COBIT, frameworks like the ISO 27000 series, certainly the NIST cybersecurity framework, are all still relevant. It's just a difference in terms of how it is that you're applying the new and emerging capabilities on the marketplace and how it is that you're implementing them in your environment. One additional framework, one again that I have found time and time again that's been useful in terms of having conversations about cybersecurity is the CIS 20 critical security controls. I find them to be easily explained, easily digested by non-security practitioners, and helpful in creating roadmaps for organizations, again, in terms of where to start. It's not by mistake, again, the number one or the first control about identifying assets. And the comment I just made about Expanse, again, from our perspective, being able to offer services across the cybersecurity spectrum and across all 5 pillars of the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's important to use frameworks. They're not the end all, but it's important to understand where you fall out in terms of your maturity level when tagged against them.
Yeah, I'll agree. I can't speak directly to COVID-19, but from the threat intelligence side, one of the frameworks we have found most useful in standardizing the way that we discuss adversaries and the techniques they use is a framework called ATT&CK from MITRE, which stands for Adversary Tactics, Techniques, and Common Knowledge, which lays out all of the common attack patterns that an adversary might use, so that as you are trying to understand how could you have defended against that adversary in the future, you can map those out to your own security controls. That's something my team's done a lot of research on, and we've actually published a lot of material on it in that mapping, specifically mapping back to Palo Alto Networks controls as well. So I'll just mention ATT&CK as a very useful framework for threat intel.
Perfect. Thank you. We have now the questions are coming in. The second one is from Ranier Gomez. He's asking how SASE can help to protect against APT.
Well, I mean, SASE, as we know, let's first make sure we're all on the same sheet of music. As we understand it, is a convergence of lots of different technologies and capabilities for both networking and cybersecurity. And so as we think about securing this now widespread environment where the perimeter is essentially absent, the goal of maintaining and gaining visibility into all of your assets, regardless of where they are, should be the number one priority of practitioners. And this is where the SASE framework, I think, begins to shine, because you begin to think about having visibility into all of those various data elements and weaving in threat prevention throughout as you, again, extend policy and security to your data elements, regardless of where they are, ensuring that your users or stakeholders have secure access to this information, regardless of where it is. So SASE plays a huge role in it, and again, is one of the topics that we think will be important for future consideration.
Perfect. Thank you. Another one from Marlos Brenes. He's asking, do you have any solution to integrate with VMware VRA for automation? And thanks to you.
I'll answer, but I'm not sure on the answer. I'll tell you that the Palo Alto Networks VM series, the next generation firewall that can run virtualized, does run on VMware, and there are a lot of integrations, but I'm not exactly sure how it might integrate with VRA. I don't know if MK has a full answer on that, but that's the best I can do.
I think I should be good.
All right, unless Dula or Bortolazo want to add to this question, then I'm going to move on to the next one. All right, moving on to the next one. So it says from Juan Manuel Morales, what solutions do you recommend to strengthen the OT environment in the face of new threats?
Ryan, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. So for securing OT, the types of threats that impact most IoT devices, as well as OT environments, The real challenge is how are they going to enter the network in the first place? And how are you going to ensure that you have visibility into the traffic as it's passing into the OT environment? So depending on how your IT and OT environments are bridged together, do you have visibility at that location, at that choke point, to ensure that you can actually process the traffic between those? And do you have all the visibility inside the OT network itself to understand what kind of traffic you're seeing between those systems? The first step, I would say, in securing an OT environment is visibility, because a lot of organizations that they've deployed, different types of OT, either equipment or sensors and other things that are running plants and running other systems. Oftentimes those networks were not designed with network monitoring in place. And that is what I would suggest people be their first stop in trying to secure those environments.
All right, thank you. Another one, Ricardo Sanchez is asking, hi, which is the best path to start securing hybrid cloud the assessment of our infrastructure?
So a component of, Ryan, I'll just chime in here for 30
Sure.
seconds. A component of securing your hybrid cloud environments from our perspective would certainly be the deployment of potentially our VM series and containerized series firewalls for cloud. Having visibility into your cloud, being able to apply your policy and controls to east-west traffic within your environment is extremely important. And so that would be clearly an initial first step. And there's some other things in the way of subscriptions that you can engage in to ensure that you have threat prevention capabilities throughout.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that from a public cloud perspective, I mentioned earlier, misconfiguration is a lot of the challenge that people run into when they experience breaches. So identifying those misconfigurations as well as identifying the common challenges people run into is key. We do have a product called Prisma Cloud, Prisma Public Cloud, which is capable of analyzing your environment across different public cloud providers to understand how are you doing from a regulatory perspective, but also truly from a security perspective, are you doing the right things to ensure that you have those misconfigurations stomped out before you actually experience a breach. So I would definitely say to start there in addition to what MK offered.
Perfect, thank you. Herman Torres, I'm gonna translate this one. So he's asking, what do you think of the increasingly common trends that exist regarding attacks made on business applications? Will this be another trend for 2021 in increasingly digitalized economies?
I think the adversaries who we face, especially the financially motivated ones, are opportunistic. They're going to take advantage of the opportunity that's in front of them so that they can get into the network. They don't necessarily care what application especially when it comes to ransomware, which is one of our really common attack patterns now, they don't necessarily care what vector they use to get in. Their goal is to get in and then apply as much pain as possible. So if a business application like Exchange or something else is the route that they can use to get into the network, they will absolutely use that. Depending on the organization, depending on where their sort of priority data is, what systems that they rely on, you might see a lot of variation from ransomware attack to ransomware attack, because it is truly just about let's apply the most pain as possible to that organization to get them to pay the largest ransom.
Perfect, thank you. MK, would you like to add to that one, or should I move on to the next question?
Nope, Ryan gave a full-throated answer there.
I agree. Okay, so another one from Augusto, he's asking in Portuguese, so I'm gonna translate this one also. He's asking, so is the sector of strategic infrastructures, energy, water, health, etc., has been the target of cyber threats. However, the old segregation strategy has proved to be efficient in preventing damage to the productive change. However, the process of intruding the productive change with elements of IoT have put these industries at risk. What would be the strategy of, what would be, in your understanding, the strategy would be similar in regards to the depth, the defense of networks, or is there going to be a different evolution, a differentialized evolution to this kind of attacks? Does that make sense? Did I translate it correctly?
So let me take a stab at that, and then I'm sure Ryan will have some comments as well. I think that this is a perfect example of where we've been talking about again, the need to be thinking about zero trust architecture in environments, and quite specifically the idea of segmentation within environments. I think is critical as we think about protecting infrastructure assets moving forward. The bell's been ringing for years and years on protecting infrastructure. But again, they like other public sector entities, they suffer from legacy solutions being in place, while new entities that stand up seem to benefit from concurrent or emerging technologies. And what we have to do is a better job of helping those old school organizations segment their environments and then put protections in place that allow them visibility and a way to protect moving forward in the future. But I think it's challenging. I think zero trust has a place in that conversation.
Yeah, I agree with MK. I mean, as we see these types of environments where they're operating critical infrastructure come sort of into the modern age, where you used to have a system, maybe a shack somewhere with sensors in it and control points with a dial-up modem that had to be dialed into or call out so that you had temporary access to it. Now that system gets connected directly to the internet so that it can access, so that someone can remotely manage it. That is a convenience and potentially a lot of cost savings, but also introduces potential vulnerability. And that's where visibility, zero trust are key, but it requires somebody to be thinking about that before the actual network change occurs. Because if you run headlong into that to get the efficiency and the cost benefits without thinking about how to secure it, that's where you open up that potential impact.
Thank you. Both are great answers. Thank you for that. I wanted to tap into a question that was asked in the middle of your presentation, but I think it's very relevant for our audience. And Gloria Flores was asking, what is your recommendation to implement awareness campaigns in the organizations with the goal of developing a cybersecurity culture?
Yeah, so I mean, the trick to this is one, continuing to train and make sure that you evangelize to your internal stakeholders or your employees about the need to be aware of what's happening out there on the landscape. So to the degree that you can, those awareness campaigns become vitally important in terms of your first line of defense, which is the user engaging in the systems that they're utilizing. Training continues to be vital. There are outside organizations that help, gamify, help ensure that you can posture training in a way that it's easily consumable by your internal stakeholders. And I think it remains a critical component of an overall resilient security apparatus.
Yeah, I agree with MK, and I'll just add when it comes to, especially around phishing training, phishing being one of the major vectors that organizations experience intrusions through. If a user's never been phished, they're less likely to recognize a phish. If they get phished every month through a training exercise with different themes and different content, they're going to become much more vigilant about identifying those. And if you can gamify that process to be able to give people some sort of reward back if they find the phish first or they submit it to security, you do really sort of just force a culture of people who are on the lookout for phishing attacks. And that's just one step along the path of creating a really security-focused culture.
Thank you. There's another comment from Herman who's just thanking us. Thank you, Herman. There is another question that I believe is relevant to everybody in the audience by Ricardo Sanchez. He was asking, which is the best path for cloud protection in an organization, starting the migration from on-premise infrastructures?
So I know we've already commented on the solution that Palo Alto Networks offers, which is our Prisma Cloud solution. We have one of the industry's first full cloud security platforms that covers your cloud security needs from end to end. I think it's a great place to start those conversations if you are looking for an integrated cloud security solution and you're in the process of trying to figure out how to migrate from on-prem environments into the cloud. So certainly the account teams would be available to talk to you guys about how to get that process started.
Yeah, I'll just add, you're not the first person to go through this. Many have done it before you, and tools have been built to assist you in doing that securely, and take advantage of those now. Be happy that you weren't doing this 10 years ago when people were doing it before things like Prisma Cloud existed, where they didn't necessarily have the same capabilities.
Perfect. And the last one by Augusto, I'm going to translate it as well. how do you, the speaker, so he's asking directly to you, Ryan and MK, how do you understand the introduction of predictive and preventive actions in automation and IoT environments?
So especially in IoT environments, IoT devices, while there's a large diversity of them, there's many types of them, they typically have very common patterns in how they operate. Our IoT security product actually uses machine learning to just look at the network traffic to identify the device, because we know once we've seen a small number of them, we can classify those very quickly. You can then use that information also to automate the process of securing them, so that when a device comes into your network and it's classified as, let's say a camera, you could put it automatically into a VLAN that says, this is where the cameras go. Let's isolate them so they don't need to go and access anything else. With IoT especially, this is a place where the machines can help us do the best job against the machines. You don't need to rely on humans to do all that classification. If you're doing that IoT lifecycle management that I described, you should absolutely be using analytics and automation to be able to properly secure them.
And you should note that Palo Alto Networks has a subscription solution attached to the next-gen firewall that helps with the identification and scaling of security to IoT devices.
So thank you so much for that. We're at the top of the hour and we're already done with questions. So we finished right on time. Just wanted to repeat that we're going to be uploading this webinar to our Latin YouTube channel. You'll be getting a follow-up email, which you'll get information about how to contact our team in case there are any further questions that we didn't get to resolve today. And if anything else comes up after this webinar, then we're always available to address your concerns. That's what we're here for. I would just like to thank you really quickly, MK Palmore, Ryan Olson, always a pleasure to have you here. Our panelists, Daniel Bortolazo, Dula Hernandez, Jose Antonio Fernandez, Wellington, Mauricio, Amaury. This was all the team of experts that were online to help address any questions. So again, if anything else comes in the future, we'll be ready to answer. And thank you to everybody that joined us this morning, evening, afternoon, whatever it is that you're connecting from. Thank you for your time and thank you for everything. We'll keep in touch. Thank you, guys.